Hi. Okay, so today we are going to continue on teaching about how to create your own functions. Hopefully you've already watched the video on how to create the main function. This will kind of continue off. Like I said, we're going to learn how to create a variance function and then a standard deviation function. This really won't teach us anything more than what the previous video about creating a mean function did. However, it'll provide some practice and it'll be kind of interesting, and in case you don't know how to calculate variance or standard deviation, you'll learn that pretty intimately here. So I encourage you to follow along if you have R on your computer, and that'll give you kind of some more practice on creating a function. So first we're going to create a function for variance, and we will assign that function, and we are going to have it read, our argument is going to be a vector known as x. Perfect. And so we'll say that first this time. So we're going to say variance function. It's not necessary to name it the same thing that you did over there, but I just like to. And we'll go ahead and save. Perfect. So we are all set, and we will actually save it to source as well. Sweet. So in order to find variance, I'll just kind of list out the steps so we can kind of follow it. So first we find our average of the vector. So find average of vector. And then we subtract the mean from each of the elements in the vector. So subtract mean from each of the elements in vector. Cool. And then we square the differences. So we square differences. And then we sum those squares. So sorry, I'm being super picky on my outlining because I think it's super important. And then we, after we've summed the squares, we divide the sum of squares by the number of elements minus 1. Perfect. And so you might not find it useful to kind of outline everything you do, but for the purposes of teaching and really for the purposes of creating complicated functions, it's important to know where you're going and kind of have a good idea of that. So if you watched the last video, you know that we created our own function, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So our average is going to be the mean function, and it's going to be the mean of x. So we're creating the function that we created last video, known as mean function. You can see it up here. That's the function that we used. We're going to use it to find the mean of our argument, the vector x. Perfect. So then we are going to subtract the mean from each element in our vector. So we can label that difference if we want. You can label it whatever you want. So we are going to say the average, and sorry, I made a typo up there. So average is going to subtract each. We're going to subtract the average from each of the elements in our vector x. Perfect. And so just to kind of prove that this will work, we are going to, I'll show you down here. So we have our x vector that we've already created, and we are going to say mean of x subtracted by x, and so we get sort of the mean subtracted by each of those elements. So just kind of showing you that syntax works, and that'll give you kind of create a new vector for you of the differences. So now we're going to square each of those. So we will say, why don't we just say difference then we are going to say that that's going to be difference and difference squared. And so I'll just kind of prove that that'll work and create a similar thought process down in our console. And so, sweet, so that's difference, and then difference squared, we'll put a vector of this differences squared. Perfect. So we have 2 squared is 4, 0 squared is 0, negative 2 squared is 4. Sweet. So then we go ahead and sum those squares. So sum of squares, and that will be a summation of our difference squared. Sweet. So now we have our sum of squares. Now all we have to do is divide the sum of squares by the number of elements minus 1. So we go ahead and say, and this will be our answer, so we'll go ahead and call it output. And we say we want the sum of squares, and we want it to be divided by, and here it'll be a bit tricky, but we'll say the length, and we remember what the length command is, so length of x minus 1. Sweet. So we'll go ahead and save that. And we see that it was error-free. Say if I had a typo right there and tried to save it. Oh, looks like so. Okay, disregard that. Try to save it. Sweet. So we are going to see if this works. So first we'll find the variance using r's function, variance of x, which is 4. Cool. And so then we are going to use our function, variance function, and we are going to say x. Ta-da, we got the same answer as r did. So that's another good suggestion is before you create a function, know what you want it to do and have a way of checking to see if it ultimately does what you want it to. Luckily, something as simple as variance, it's easy to check. So, sweet. Okay, now if you are a student of statistics, or if you know anything about it, you know that the standard deviation is the square root of variance. So we are going to create one final function, and so I'll just kind of walk you through that. So we are going to call this function the standard deviation, and we are going to, that'll be the name, it'll be its argument will be a vector, and we're ready to roll. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to simply square root the variance. So we are going to draw on the function that we just created. So output is going to be square root of, and we're going to say variance function, and it'll need our variance function will need the vector x. Cool. And so we'll go ahead and save this, and we'll say standard deviation. Save. There we go. It's ready to go. So first we'll test it with Stata. We'll say the standard deviation of x is going to be 2. The square root of 4 is in fact 2. Now, for the moment of truth, we are going to test our function by saying standard deviation of x is, oh, sorry. So because I didn't retype output, R doesn't know what to output. So we type output again, save it, and we come down here, and standard deviation of x, this time with an output, will be 2. Sweet, so that's how you can kind of create functions. Now we don't have to rely on R to kind of create functions for us. Sweet. If you have any questions, make sure to watch future videos or contact us at the Research Support Center. Thanks.